Imagine living through a freezing medieval winter. No gas, no electricity, no central heating. Yet somehow, the lords and ladies of the Middle Ages survived and even lived in surprising comfort. Today, we'll uncover the forgotten secrets of how the medieval upper class built, dressed, and lived to beat the brutal cold without the modern conveniences we take for granted. This is the story of how medieval homes stayed warm against the longest, harshest winters. In the medieval world, winter was no small matter. Cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Frost could creep into a stone-walled room, stiffen your limbs, spoil your food, and even claim your life. And while peasants had little choice but to shiver through the seasons, the medieval upper class, kings, nobles, bishops, and wealthy merchants had the means to fight the cold. Yet without gas, without electricity, without any modern heating systems, how did they keep their sprawling halls, lofty towers, and echoing chambers even remotely warm? The answer lies in a fascinating blend of architecture, technology, fuel, and sheer determination, a strategy that made survival through brutal winters not just possible, but, in many cases, surprisingly comfortable. It all began with the hearth. The heart of every medieval household, rich or poor, was the fire. But in the homes of the upper class, fireplaces were bigger, better built, and more strategically placed than in the cottages of commoners. The earliest medieval homes, particularly in the early Middle Ages, often had a central hearth, an open fire pit in the middle of the main hall. The smoke rose, more or less, to a hole in the ceiling, called a louver. There were no chimneys yet. The hall would fill with smoke before it drifted out, making the air thick and often unpleasant. Despite this, the large open fires generated enough radiant heat to keep the nobility relatively warm, especially when paired with thick tapestries, heavy wooden furniture, and fur-lined clothing that helped trap the warmth. But as centuries passed, especially by the 12th and 13th centuries, chimneys began to appear in wealthier homes, a true revolution in heating. Chimneys allowed fires to burn hotter and cleaner. Instead of smoky, stifling halls, castles and manor houses could now have multiple fireplaces, each vented properly, in different rooms. Great halls, private chambers, and even kitchens boasted their own sources of warmth. Large stone or brick fireplaces dominated the walls, often carved with ornate designs, both functional and symbolic of the owner's wealth and status. Fuel was crucial too. The upper class had access to resources that peasants could only dream of. Dry, seasoned hardwood, oak, ash, beech burned hotter and longer than the scrubby wood or peat moss that peasants collected. These superior fuels provided a steadier, stronger heat. Storage was key. Wood had to be properly stacked and protected from rain to ensure it burned efficiently. Wealthy households often had massive wood stores, carefully managed and rationed through the cold months. Entire forest plots might be owned specifically for heating needs, with stewards tracking which groves could be harvested year by year. But heating wasn't just about roaring fires. It was about trapping the heat once it was made. Thick stone walls acted as thermal masses, slowly absorbing warmth and releasing it back into the rooms over time. Heavy wooden shutters closed over windows to block out icy drafts. Rushes, or later woven mats, covered stone floors, insulating against the frozen ground. Curtains, often made of heavy wool or linen, were hung not just over windows but around beds and doorways, forming miniature cocoons of warmth. The wealthiest homes even had built-in heating innovations. Wall fireplaces connected through hidden flues, warming multiple rooms with a single chimney. Hot stones were heated by fires and placed under beds or near feet during cold nights. Portable braziers, small, metal pots filled with burning coals, were carried from room to room, offering mobile warmth. Despite all this ingenuity, winters were still hard. Rooms farther from the hearth stayed chilly. Breath hung visibly in the air. Water in basins might freeze overnight. Comfort was relative, but for the medieval upper class, survival was far more luxurious than it was for the common folk. In the next part, we'll step deeper into the architectural tricks that turned massive, drafty stone castles and manor houses into havens of warmth during the harshest medieval winters. At first glance, a medieval castle seems like the worst place to stay warm. Thick stone walls, towering ceilings, endless corridors of cold, echoing stone. But medieval architects, especially those who built homes for the upper class, knew a secret. It wasn't about fighting the cold everywhere. It was about creating pockets of warmth where it mattered most. The first and most important step was strategic architecture. The Great Hall, the heart of castle life, was always built with heating in mind. In early medieval designs, the central hearth was left open, with smoke escaping through a vent in the high roof. Later, as chimneys became common, the fireplace moved to the side walls, and massive stone hearths dominated the room. These fireplaces weren't just for show. Their design, with wide, deep openings and flared chimneys, maximized heat radiation across the room. Above the great hall, solar chambers, private rooms for the lord and lady, were placed. They were usually built directly above heated spaces to take advantage of the rising warmth. Thick stone walls trapped daytime heat and released it slowly into the solar at night. These chambers had smaller fireplaces of their own, along with thick, insulating wall hangings and shuttered windows. Window placement was critical too. In the early medieval period, windows were often tiny slits, just enough for defense and some light. As architecture advanced, slightly larger windows appeared, but always with heavy wooden shutters. On cold days and nights, shutters were closed tightly, trapping warm air inside. In many castles, internal courtyards provided another heating trick. By clustering buildings around a sheltered courtyard, castles reduced the impact of freezing winds. The courtyard itself often trapped sun-warmed air, creating a microclimate that made adjacent rooms slightly warmer. A house wrapped around itself stayed warmer than a building standing alone. Flooring played a surprising role as well. Stone floors, although cold to the touch, were durable and effective at absorbing radiant heat. In the wealthiest homes, floors were layered, a base of stone or packed earth, topped with rush mats, and finally covered with woven rugs or tapestries. In France, Italy, and later parts of England, glazed tiles were sometimes used, reflecting heat back into the room. Even staircases and corridors were designed thoughtfully. Narrow, spiraling staircases were common, not just for defense, but because small, enclosed spaces retained heat far better than wide, open galleries. Still, upper-class medieval people understood that large spaces could only be made bearably warm, not cozy by modern standards. To truly enjoy warmth, they created intimate spaces within larger rooms. A dining table might be set up directly beside the hearth. A reading nook could be built into a thick window embrasure, lined with cushions and enclosed by heavy curtains. The famous canopy beds, draped with thick curtains on all sides, weren't just symbols of status, they were microclimates. Once the heavy bed curtains were drawn closed, the occupant's own body heat, combined with warm stones or coals placed underneath, could create a surprisingly warm sleeping environment even in a freezing stone tower. There was no expectation that the entire castle would be comfortable. Instead, the focus was on zones of survival, spaces where warmth could be concentrated, protected, and enjoyed. In the next part, we'll explore the role of clothing, bedding, and personal habits, and how the medieval upper class kept themselves warm even when their houses could not. No matter how large the hearth or how carefully the castle was built, one truth remained: in winter, the cold found its way in. Medieval people knew they couldn't rely on architecture alone. Instead, they adapted their clothing, bedding, and daily habits to make life in the chill not just survivable, but surprisingly comfortable. First and foremost, they dressed for the season, and layers were everything. The wealthy had access to finer materials than the peasantry. Instead of coarse wool and rough linen, they wore multiple layers of carefully tailored garments made from rich wool, soft fur, and fine linen. A typical winter outfit for a nobleman or lady began with a linen chemise or shirt, soft against the skin and easy to wash, followed by one or more woolen tunics or gowns, and topped off with an overgown, cloak, or mantle. Wool was the miracle fabric of the Middle Ages. Naturally insulating even when damp, breathable, and durable, it was the perfect material for combating cold. The finest woolens were thickly woven and sometimes felted, making them even warmer and more resistant to the cutting winter wind. Fur played a critical role too. The nobility had access to luxurious furs, ermine, fox, squirrel, and sable, which lined cloaks, sleeves, collars, and even boots. A fur-lined cloak could mean the difference between shivering through a winter hunt and moving comfortably across frozen fields. Fur hats and mittens added to the ensemble, keeping extremities protected. Footwear was adapted as well. Thick woolen hose and leather boots lined with fur or straw kept feet warm, even on icy stone floors. Indoor shoes, often made of soft leather or cloth, were worn inside to avoid dragging mud and snow into living spaces. At night, bedding became the next line of defense. Beds in wealthy homes were constructed with layers of straw or wool mattresses, topped with soft linens and heavy woolen blankets. Wealthy sleepers might pile several coverlets or quilts atop their beds, trapping warmth effectively. Feather beds, although rare, were prized for their insulating properties, offering a soft, warm refuge from the cold. The canopied bed was the ultimate medieval winter tool. Draped with heavy curtains on all sides, it created a personal cocoon of warmth. Once inside, body heat quickly built up, turning the bed into a tiny haven even when the rest of the castle was icy. And then there were bed warmers. Before climbing under the covers, servants sometimes placed heated stones or metal pans filled with hot coals between the sheets to take the edge off the cold. These devices were carefully managed to avoid fire hazards, but when used properly, they made the first moments in bed much more bearable. Beyond clothing and bedding, medieval people adjusted their daily routines to the season. Mornings were slow and deliberate. Fires had to be rekindled before work could begin. Meals were hearty and warm: stews, porridges, and roasted meats, all designed to fortify the body against the cold. Hot drinks like mulled wine or spiced ale were consumed in moderation, helping to warm from within. Activities were concentrated around the hearth. Reading, sewing, playing games, conducting meetings, all centered on the great fireplaces of the hall or solar. It wasn't uncommon for entire households to gather in one room for the coldest parts of the day, conserving warmth collectively. In the coldest winters, the upper class didn't pretend they could beat the cold entirely. Instead, they wrapped themselves in layers of insulation, fabric, fur, fire, and community until spring returned. In the next part, we'll uncover the innovations and clever heating devices medieval nobles used, including early central heating systems and portable heaters you might not expect. For all the careful building, heavy layering, and clever habits, the medieval upper class didn't stop there. Where fire and fabric weren't enough, they innovated, using surprisingly sophisticated methods and devices to push back the winter cold. One of the most impressive of these was the early form of central heating, the hypocaust. Originally developed by the Romans, the hypocaust system never completely disappeared. In a few of the wealthiest monasteries, castles, and manor houses, particularly in southern Europe and later medieval Britain, heating systems modeled after hypocausts were installed. Here's how it worked. A furnace was built beneath a building, often beneath a chapel, kitchen, or bathing room. Hot air from the fire circulated through a series of stone channels or hollow floors, gently warming the rooms above. The heat radiated through the floors and sometimes even through the walls, creating a steady, mild warmth that didn't rely on open flames within the room itself. These systems were expensive, complicated to maintain, and rare. They were reserved for places of high importance, religious centers, palatial estates, or royal baths, but where they were used, they offered an incredible luxury: rooms warm without the constant need for tending open fires. For more ordinary upper-class homes, simpler portable heating devices were common. Braziers were perhaps the most widespread. A brazier was a metal bowl or basket, often made of iron or bronze, filled with hot coals. Braziers could be moved from room to room, placed beneath dining tables, beside beds, or near work areas. They provided localized heat, a small pocket of warmth wherever needed. However, they came with a danger: the risk of fire or deadly smoke inhalation. Careful management was critical, and larger households assigned servants specifically to tend the fires and ensure braziers were used safely. Another clever tool was the foot warmer. These were small wooden boxes or frames containing a tray of hot coals, placed beneath a table. Nobles and guests would rest their feet or legs near them, keeping their extremities warm during long meals or evening gatherings. Some foot warmers were even built into furniture, hidden compartments and benches or thrones that discreetly housed warming embers. For sleeping, bed warmers were indispensable. A bed warmer typically looked like a shallow metal pan with a long handle. Hot coals were placed inside, and the pan was slid between the bed sheets, moving slowly to warm the linens without burning them. In grander houses, multiple bed warmers might be used to prepare a lord's sleeping chamber on especially bitter nights. And there was yet another layer of protection: heated stones. Large stones were placed near the hearth during the day, absorbing heat. At night, they were wrapped in cloth and set near beds, at the foot of canopied sleeping areas, or inside small chests to gently radiate warmth for hours. This simple but effective method was a common, low-risk way to extend the fire's blessing into the chill of the night. Even clothing innovations supported mobility during winter. Heavy fur-lined traveling cloaks, thick gloves, and reinforced leather boots allowed nobles to move between different parts of their sprawling estates without feeling the full bite of winter. Altogether, medieval nobles surrounded themselves with layers of solutions, architectural tricks, personal adaptations, portable heat sources, each designed to battle the long, dark, bone-chilling months of the medieval winter. In the final part, we'll reflect on how the medieval upper classes' battle against winter shaped their homes, their customs, and even their social life, and what lessons their old world of warmth still offers today. By the end of a medieval winter, when the snows melted and the icy winds softened into spring breezes, life would begin to shift again. Windows would be opened. Hearth fires would burn lower. Heavy furs would be tucked away. But even then, the marks of winter remained, woven into the very structure of medieval homes, into daily life, into culture itself. The fight against the cold had shaped far more than architecture. It had shaped society, ritual, and human connection. The hearth, literal and symbolic, was at the center of noble life. The grand fireplace in the great hall wasn't just a source of warmth. It was the heart of hospitality, a symbol of wealth and power. Feasts, councils, celebrations all unfolded around the flickering firelight. Stories were told there. Songs were sung. Deals were struck. Alliances were forged. The simple reality that only parts of a castle or manor could be truly warmed meant that people gathered together. Solitude was rare in winter. It was not just comfort but necessity that drew nobles, servants, guests, and even pets into shared spaces. In that gathering, warmth was multiplied, not just by fire, but by human presence. Winter customs, too, revolved around heat and light. Midwinter feasts, particularly those celebrating Christmas and New Year, became festivals of fire and feasting, times to push back the darkness with roaring hearths, blazing candles, and tables laden with hot food. Religious traditions like Candlemas, celebrating the coming of light, took on deeper meaning when one had spent months in smoky, dim chambers. The season dictated rhythms of work and rest. During winter, with fields dormant and travel treacherous, courtly life slowed. Administrative tasks, estate management, legal proceedings all gathered indoors. Sewing, embroidery, musical practice, reading aloud from sacred or romantic texts, these indoor pursuits thrived by the fireside. Even medieval art and literature reflect a world deeply conscious of warmth and cold. Paintings show richly dressed nobles huddled by great fires. Illuminated manuscripts portray cozy winter gatherings framed by icy landscapes beyond thick stone walls. Chronicles speak of brutal winters when even the wealthy struggled, and of milder years when fires were allowed to burn low. The strategies used to combat winter also revealed and reinforced social hierarchies. The lord's private solar would be well furnished with warmth, a grand hearth, thick hangings, layers of soft bedding. Meanwhile, lower-ranked servants might sleep in the cold, clustered in communal halls without the luxury of individual fires. Access to warmth was as much a marker of status as fine clothing or rare delicacies. Yet despite all these efforts, winter remained an undeniable force. Even the wealthiest castles and finest manors could not banish the cold entirely. They could only manage it, mitigate it, and endure it with cleverness, patience, and the communal spirit born from centuries of shared hardship. Today, when a click of a thermostat can flood a home with warmth, it's easy to forget the depth of ingenuity, effort, and adaptation required by our ancestors to survive a single winter. But in the echoes of great stone halls, in the sagging beams of timbered manors, and in the faded tapestries that once held back icy drafts, their stories still linger. Stories of a world where warmth was not taken for granted. It was earned, protected, and celebrated. Where survival through winter wasn't automatic, it was a communal triumph. And where every flicker of flame, every glowing ember, was a small, vital victory against the long, hard dark. Medieval winters were long, harsh, and unforgiving, but through clever building, layered living, and centuries of wisdom, the upper class found ways to endure and thrive. What part of their survival strategies surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey into the cold past, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell for more incredible stories from history. Thanks for watching and stay warm out there.